Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive tonight. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the broadcaster and former MP Anna Soubry, there they are, and the political journalist Isabel Oakeshott. So let's see what's on some of those front pages. The Guardian leads with scientists encouraging the government to delay the last loosening of lockdown on June the 21st and allow second doses of the COVID vaccine to be given sooner. The Metro greets that news with the headline, Third Wave Alert. The Telegraph carries a joint letter from 4 global health and financial bodies urging G7 governments to step up their commitment to providing vaccines to third world countries. The Mail leads with its own campaign, calling on the government to scrap holiday COVID tests, saying they're a rip-off. The Eye has seen data revealing that out of more than 7,800 complaints of racist behaviour by police officers in the period concerned, only 181 led to further action. Face of Hope, now an almost 2 million almost 2 million NHS, £2 million, shall we try that again? £2 million NHS treatment has helped save this baby, Arthur Morgan, and could do the same for many others. That's on the Daily Mail. Mirror. Oof. And the Financial Times has word of a restructuring at the accountancy firm EY as it grapples with the potential fallout from its involvement with the collapse of the payments company Wirecard. And as I was saying, we're joined tonight by Anna Soubry and Isabel Oakeshott. Good evening to you both. I hope you enjoyed your bank holiday. Let's kick off with the Metro. Third wave alert. We're on a knife edge, scientists say, Anna.
Well, when I say I'm not sure about that, I mean, the whole of this is meant to be led by the data. And if you look at the data, of course, the vaccine program has been a huge success. The vaccine has been a huge success. And we are now up to almost 50% of our population that's had 2 jabs. And I'm not doubting that there is a rise because of the so-called Indian variant. But, you know, if we're not reopening on June the 21st, my real thoughts are with businesses. And that will have it's really difficult for these guys. They need certainty. They need to know whether or not they need to order the extra things that they will need if they're in restaurants and pubs and bars, cafes and so on. Then there's all the other arm of hospitality, and it's the lack of certainty which will damage, I think, a lot of our businesses, and goodness knows they've experienced enough damage. And if I may say finally, I think it would be helpful if a lot of these scientists actually were quiet. If we're doing this, let's do it properly through SAGE, let's have a proper analysis of the data, but I would caution this government about, yes, rushing into ending all of it before the data's right, but equally, don't underestimate the damage it will do to British business.
Well, they'll probably argue that they are looking at the data, and if you look at the government data from today, it's all rising, isn't it? Isabel, what do you think? Because we've learnt... Yeah, it's small percentages, it is. But Isabel, time and time again, we've learnt with this virus that if you don't act fast, it just gets completely out of control.
Well, I don't think we're anywhere near that, and I would go further than Anna, and I think this kind of language from individuals on SAGE talking about Britain being on a knife edge is incredibly unhelpful. Let's actually look at the figures. They're vanishingly small. At the moment, there are 743 people in hospital with COVID. The majority of those people probably have other health conditions. To put that in context, there are 140,000 hospital beds in the UK. So 743 is nothing, and there's been 1 death in the last day. Sadly, 1,600 people a day die of many different causes, about 300 of them from cancer. So these figures are absolutely tiny. And as Anna rightly says, the vaccine programme has been a really big success. The vast majority of people who need the vaccine have now had 1 or both jabs. So it seems to me that there's absolutely no basis whatsoever for now talking and in this alarmist fashion about having to delay the ending of all restrictions.
Well, let's just look at the figures. People tested positive. These are government figures from today. In the last 24-hour period, 28.8%, a rise of that in people testing positive. Deaths, you did say 1 daily death. That hasn't happened since last July, but it is up in the last 7 days, up 45%. Patients admitted to hospital, 23.2%. And virus tests conducted, 1.3%. Obviously, it's key how much testing we're doing. Anna, do you think also key is the fact that the vaccination drive has been so successful? So we may be looking at this and remembering December, but we didn't have the vaccination rate then.
Absolutely. And you see, the other thing is about all of this is that the government told us, and rightly, I think, the only way out of it was the vaccine. And so looking at this from the perspective of just ordinary viewers, they will be saying, well, hang on a moment, we were all told if we get jabbed up and this vaccine is rolled out in the astonishing way that it has, and with the great take-up as well, then we could begin to return to normality. And so, all throughout this pandemic, we've had a big problem with the government over-promising and then under-delivering. And so I think there are all sorts of risks. But I do say, want to make it very clear, the data is important. But if, as you rightly identify, put it into perspective, we are nowhere like we were in March last year, and indeed in December and indeed September of last year. So, be cautious, but goodness me, we do need to be realistic about the alternatives if we don't get back to some sort of normality on June the 21st.
But the scientists will probably say that we do have to be realistic, and they are right to raise these concerns, and they are looking at the data. Do you think, Isabel, that yes, they can say this, they should be saying this, but really we should be looking 2 weeks down the line when we make that call?
Well, the government's not going to make a final decision for another 2 weeks anyway. But I want to pick up the percentages that you read out, which sounded so alarming, because I really think they do need context. I looked at my own area, what the statistics are for West Oxfordshire, where I live. And alarmingly, the number of hospital admissions for coronavirus has gone up 300%. But guess what? That's from 0 to 4 people. So these statistics, you've got to look at them in context. And I think this is a real moment now, a real test of Boris Johnson's leadership. And what he does now will set the tone for the next 6 months to the next year, even for the next 2 years in our country. Are we going to rediscover some backbone in the face of these minor wobbles? And
what do you make? Sorry to jump in there. What do you make of Bolton, though?
Area.
Sorry, carry on. What do you make of places like Bolton? Do you think that moving forward, where they don't have figures like you have in your area, they do have a rising number of the India variant, do you think what we need to do is have local lockdowns?
No, I don't think we need any lockdowns at all. Local lockdowns are just not helpful at this point. I think we've got to get away from obsessing about so-called cases and then being positive results of tests. About a third of people are asymptomatic. Most of the people who are testing positive are now young people. They're not actually ill. So it doesn't, in a sense, matter that much.
They do spread it.
Yes, but if everybody's been vaccinated in the vulnerable groups, that doesn't actually matter that much.
They're not, though, are they? Anna, go ahead.
No, it doesn't. No, it's no. It's not quite as simple as that. We know that the vaccine, although it's brilliant, it only gives 80% of protection to only 80% of people. And so there will always be some people, even if they've had 2 jabs, who will still get the very worst effects of the disease. The point about where I absolutely do agree with Isabel about local lockdowns, there's no point locking down in Bolton because people will literally be able to travel a few miles and they'll be able to go to the pub and be able to enjoy, if you like, the non-lockdown. What you need absolutely is testing, and then you need the surge vaccinations as well. And that is occurring in a lot of these areas where local authorities know better, frankly, than anybody. And they can get into those communities and they can make sure that people are getting vaccinated. That is the way out of it all. It's by everybody getting vaccinated. But the real question is how many people are going into hospital? Because one, we don't want people to get serious disease. Secondly, of course, we don't want our NHS, wherever it might be in the country, to be overcome and overwhelmed by a flood of people with very serious disease from COVID. That's not what we're seeing.
Just before we go to break, let's look at the Daily Telegraph. give the third world extra jabs to halt variants. One wonders how many times this plea can be made before it's actually actioned. Isabel, what do you think?
Well, I think this is a really interesting and important story. It's a letter jointly written by the heads of the World Health Organization, the IMF and the WTO, appealing to countries such as our own, where we do have the wherewithal to actually be generous and share some of our vaccine capability, to do so, because in the end, coronavirus and this pandemic is a global problem. And unless all parts of the world benefit from the amazing vaccine programs that we've had, or at least some bit of it, then we're all going to be disadvantaged. So rather than talk about vaccinating young children, which I think is a deeply disturbing debate that is now underway, if we've got that spare capability, let's give it elsewhere.
Anna, what do you think? You know, just what was it, last week, we were reporting from South Sudan on how they've got COVAX jabs, no one's taking them up, and now they've shipped them off across the border to Kenya to see if they're going to use them. But should we be giving them the jabs if they're not going to use them?
Of course. No, of course we should, and we need a concerted effort. Actually, I have a friend and a neighbour who said to me, you know, I got my vaccine effectively for nothing and wanted to make a donation of the cost of the vaccine, if somebody could calculate how much that dose would have been, to some of the great charities that will be involved in COVAX, not just our government, but also there'll be charities like Red Cross and Oxfam and so on and so forth, already delivering great work in these countries, who one could make a donation to so that they could speed up the vaccination being rolled out across the world. Because, you know, yet again, Isabel, this is very worrying. I accept will upset a number of your editors that we are agreeing so much this evening, but isn't that good? Because it is right that unless everybody is in receipt of this vaccination, no one is safe. We're not all safe until everyone is safe, and we need now some really big, serious thinking about how we persuade countries like Sudan, wherever it may be in the world, that they need to take this vaccination. And that can be done. And again, it's at a local level. And it's often about through gentle persuasion of people, making people understand how it doesn't just protect them, but actually it protects their communities.
OK, Isabel, Anna, thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break there. But coming up, nice work if you can get it. We'll tell you about the charity bosses earning more than the Prime Minister when we come back. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now, Anna Soubry and Isabel Oakeshott. Hello again. Thanks a lot. I'll call you your proper names now, not sort of like Brennifer or something. OK, let's go back to the Daily Telegraph. This may not actually come as a shock to many people, but Anna, what did you think? Charity chiefs earn more than the Prime Minister.
So the Prime Minister earns £157,000 a year. So you might make the argument that it wouldn't actually be that difficult for somebody in a very senior position, which a lot of these bosses are, because they're running huge, sometimes huge organisations. You know, you're not talking about a few £100,000. That's a lot of money, but you're talking actually about hundreds of millions of pounds. And so you need, you know, top dollar. You need properly good people running a lot of these charities. However, the point that's being made, I think quite rightly, by Helen Stevenson, who's the chief executive of the Charities Commission, is that, especially given the big problems that a lot of charities are going to be following the COVID pandemic, is they've got to look very carefully at how much money they do pay and making sure that they are using donors' money, ordinary people's money. They're using it wisely and properly. And I think that whilst you do need, you need the best running charities for obvious reasons, huge sums of money, as I say, in many instances. Nevertheless, they are charities. And you certainly don't want that feeling that donors' money is not being spent wisely. So she makes a good point.
Yeah, Isabel, what do you think? I mean, the Wellcome Trust, the highest paid employee, their chief investment officer taking home £4.64 million. That includes salary and bonuses last year. That's a £1.3 million rise on the year before. What's the argument for this?
I mean, I thought this was a really interesting story, actually. I mean, Anna is right. The Prime Minister really has quite a modest salary for somebody with this huge weight of responsibility. I mean, I would make the argument that the Prime Minister should be paid at least £500,000. I mean, we can't feel too sorry for them because, as David Cameron and many of his predecessors have shown, once they leave, they certainly coin it in. You know, they will make millions. But nonetheless, it's a very, really pretty modest salary for the amount of weight on their shoulders. I think people would be pretty astonished at the idea that the boss of the Wellcome Trust, it's a chief investment officer, I think, earns a little shy of £5 million. There's something that makes me feel pretty queasy about that, and really anything over 200,000. It's hard to put a cut-off point, but there's something I think most people will find a little uncomfortable about that. Of course, you need really well qualified people to run huge organizations, but something's gone pretty wrong when people are earning these enormous sums in a charity, when you've got others are donors, really doing their best to give a few pounds or a few £100 here or there and hoping that it's going to the right thing, not just to line somebody's pocket.
£2 a month in some cases, especially given the fact, and what do you think? We've had the foreign aid cut. Did you see that package that we've been running on South Sudan, where, kids aren't going to school? They're sharing textbooks.
It's disgraceful.
And you've got someone here, the Wellcome Trust, obviously nothing to do with that South Sudan package, but £4.64 million. That is eye-watering.
Look, there's an outbreak again of agreement on this. I'm struggling to justify it as well. I mean, we agree that we do need people who are eminently well qualified and able to do this, and that often means you have to tempt people out of the private sector. But then I think you could start to ask some rather serious questions about some of the remuneration of our top executives in British business. But the point about the cuts in foreign aid, I mean, I'm certainly of the view that this is one of the most disgraceful things that this government has done. It's broken the manifesto pledge. It's broken a pledge to the poorest people in the world. And it is shameful on our country that we have a government that's cut off foreign aid at a time when actually we need to be making sure that we do exactly the right thing by those countries across the world who are nothing like as prosperous as that. And that absolutely chimes in with the
We're going to have to leave it there. We're going to have to leave it there. I mean, Dominic Raab said that they're looking for value for taxpayers' money in those countries, but we're going to have to leave it there. Yeah. Thank you so much. We'll be back in the next hour. We'll see you then. I'm joined tonight by Anna Soubry and Isabel Oakeshott. Right, June the 21st. Let's get on with it, because this is what everyone is talking about. Isabel, you don't think the scientists are right, do you?
Oh, hang on a minute. I'm not going to argue with the scientists' interpretation.
Well, they're saying let's not delay. OK, go ahead. Yeah.
So, of course, the only story really at the moment is all about the June 21st date. Are we or are we not going to see an end of these desperately difficult restrictions that everybody has put up with for a very, very long time? And there's a lot of very alarmist language around from a select few scientists, including figures on SAGE, as papers quote one SAGE member talking about the UK being on a knife edge, and a significant, what looks to me like a lobbying campaign now to delay the easing of the lockdown, the final lockdown restrictions. I think it's really important when we look at some of the scary sounding statistics about huge percentage rises in the number of cases of coronavirus, just to put them in context. There are at the moment only 743 people in hospital with coronavirus. And just to put that in some kind of context, there are about 140,000 hospital beds. So these figures are tiny. Only one person died of coronavirus in the last 24 hours. So when you read about a spike in the number of cases, yes, cases are rising, but from a very, very low base. And it doesn't seem to me any justification now for prolonging any kind of lockdown measures.
Well, I'll put to you what Adam Finn from the JCVI told us. He said, if we wake up in the middle of July and realise we were too cautious and we could have relaxed things sooner, well, I think that's a mistake. that we can all live with, because we can then move forward and say, well done us, at least we took care and were careful. The mistake is going to be to rush forward and then fall flat on our faces by rushing forwards too fast. Isabel.
Well, I'm not sure who she pretends to be speaking for. I mean, if we can look back and we were too cautious.
It's Adam Finn from the JCVI.
That might be all right for some categories of people, but for all the people who are desperately waiting for operations, for example, people who are now entering 2-year waiting lists for a hip hop, for example, because the NHS is virtually shut down except to deal with everything, only to deal with coronavirus for the last year. All those people whose livelihoods are on the line, who, if they have more uncertainty, are simply not going to be able to make their businesses viable. So some of these scientists act as if there is absolutely no consequence to delaying the easing of lockdown, as if this is the only thing that matters. And actually, the collateral damage continues to be absolutely enormous. So it's time to get some perspective back.
I think they do realise. I mean, Ravi Gupta, Anna, what do you think? Ravi Gupta from NerveTag has said, I think the problem is we're not too far from reaching the sort of levels of vaccination that would help us contain the virus. And I think that people are not saying we should abandon the June 21st date altogether, but just to delay it by a few weeks while we gather more intelligence and we can look at the trajectory in a clearer way. If we look at the costs and benefits of getting it wrong, I think it is heavily in favour of delay.
Well, look, we know that we've made mistakes in the past. We know that we were too late going into the March lockdown last year. We know that we got it horribly wrong in the autumn and then again going into Christmas. And when we say horribly wrong, we mean that tens of thousands of people died who didn't need to die. We're in a very different position now because of the huge success of the vaccine and the fact that it has, it's very good. And it is, it is up to 80-90% efficient in stopping serious disease. And also, of course, so many tens of millions of people haven't just had one, but now 2 doses of it. So all-round success there. And the point, and I agree with Isabel. The point is the actual figures themselves. And we've got to be. This has got to be based on the data with a good dose of common sense. And when you take all of that into the round, I'm not happy, frankly, about scientists going into the media, dare I say, and sort of I know it's a good story and everything, but I don't think it's terribly helpful because at the end of the day, it's the government that has to make these decisions. But, I just feel for all those businesses who are saying, well, dear God, we just need certainty. We need to know. I mean, you had it in your report. Going up to 100% capacity is make or break stuff for them. And the uncertainty is very bad for business. It's not good for the rest of us either, because people are desperate. If the vaccine is the silver bullet, then why are we talking now about not ending all the restrictions, arguably until July, maybe the end of July, even later? You've got to keep the public with you.
Yeah, they
as well
argue
as doing
that
the right
not
thing
everyone's
by business.
Fully vaccinated, and even if they do get that second jab, there's a lag. But listen, let's leave that because I think we could actually debate it until June the 21st. Let's look at the Daily Mail. They've got this campaign. PCR tests, they really are extortionate, aren't they? Isabel, if you're looking at going on holiday, the PCR tests alone could cost more than your tickets.
Well, I think this is a really important campaign by the Daily Mail, and I speak from experience here because a couple of months ago I came back from a long period abroad with my 3 children, and I had to spend in the region of £1,000 on mandatory coronavirus testing. Of course, none of us had coronavirus, but nonetheless, we had to go through this rigmarole: test before you get on the plane, tests when you get back. You have to have 2, and then you have to have another one if you want to get out of quarantine early. And the point that the Daily Mail makes is that the cost of these mandatory tests is extortionate relative to what people are being charged in other countries. So oftentimes you find that you're having to pay around £140, £150, for example, for a fit to fly coronavirus test, whereas overseas, and I know this because I've done it, you can get these tests for 40 quid. So why is it that the government is allowing this tremendous rip-off? Not only that, but they're actually sort of participating in it by mandating certain companies that you have to use in order to have the test. It's available much more cheaply, and I applaud the Daily Mail for trying to get some common sense into this.
Well, the argument, I suppose, is that the equipment is just so expensive, but the Daily Mail does say that they're urging the Treasury to axe VAT on these tests. I'm sure that will cut quite a large amount of the cost out. Anna, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think you see the other thing is the PCR test is much more expensive than the lateral flow test. And so if you have a PCR test, it's £99. Well, that is a common price, if I may say. Boots, the others are obviously available, is £99. But a lateral flow test is less. And there's a lot of confusion because you need a PCR test to get out, but you can come back in from green zone areas on a lateral flow test. And as Isabel says, you then have to take, even from a green zone, another test. And I think if we really put this into context, there are real families who've not had a holiday for a long time. And many of those families, either one or both of them, have been absolutely on the front line. And there is nothing wrong with them wanting to have 2 weeks or a week in the sunshine. And it's an extraordinary amount of money for a classic and typical family of 4. And it's almost like the government is saying, you're not really allowed out. And if you have to go somewhere sunny, how dare you? We're going to make you pay through the teeth for it. And I just feel the whole thing is not good. And I think the Mail might have hit on this. I'm not sure how much cheaper it is in other countries. But I think in a way that doesn't really matter. Maybe people are being ripped off everywhere.
No, well, I was actually talking to someone in East Africa who was saying it was about £20 for a PCR test there. I'm not entirely sure how that's feasible. Yeah, I was quite surprised as well. A PCR test.
Well,
because of course,
go ahead, Isabel.
So the cost should be going down.
Yeah, exactly. Isabel, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I know it's cheaper elsewhere because I've been to quite a few countries where it is cheaper. As I say, it was £40 in the Gulf. It is
easier
free
to get.
It is, yes, very much easier to get. And in some countries, it's indeed free. So, look, this really comes down to the attitude of the government of the country concerned. And I agree with Anna. I don't think the government wants us to go abroad. They're making it as difficult as it possibly can be.
I think they probably disagree with that, saying they're keeping the costs high to keep us here. Listen, let's take a break. Anna, Isabel, we'll be back in a moment. Thanks. Coming up, tennis player Naomi Osaka withdraws from the French Open. We'll ask whether the media expects too much from these sports stars. Join us after the break. Hello again, you're watching the press preview with me now, Anna Soubry and Isabel Oakeshott. Hello to you both. Listen, in this half, let's not do any COVID. We do need a break sometimes. Let's talk about Naomi Osaka. She's on the Times and everywhere, really. Anna, what do you think? Do you think she has a right not to do those press conferences after the matches?
Well, I don't think she has a legal right in the sense that it's in her contract that she's meant to take part. I don't think they should be doing this stuff if they don't want to. It shouldn't be in their contract. She's 23. She's a sports person. She's not an entertainer. I mean, she wanted to be an entertainer. She'd have gone to RADA. And I think they're looking at this the wrong way because there have been instances, and it seems to be a problem in tennis. No other sport seems to have a press conference where people can frankly just be rude. And I would much rather the tennis authorities, if they say that people have to come almost immediately off the court and then do this huge press conference, anybody who can't be civil and actually offend somebody who's, if they're struggling with some ghastly defeat, and then they're basically asked, why are you so rubbish? I'm not surprised they want to do it. I don't think they should have to do it. I think the tennis authorities should boot people out if they can't be polite. I'm fed up with this rudeness that seems to be perfectly acceptable. I don't think it's doing any of us any favours or society at all.
And even if they aren't rude,
so
it's
I'm with her on this one.
Even if they aren't rude, it's such a difficult thing to do, isn't it? To be under that immense pressure of a match, lose the match, and then you don't have any sort of downtime, no debriefing with your coach, straight into a press conference with the world's media and having to take that on board. What did you think, Isabel, of the French Open's reaction, fining her, what, £10,000, and then saying, well, we're going to disqualify you if you don't do it?
Well, I think this has been extraordinarily badly handled, and I think there'll be a lot of soul-searching following the statement, very, very heartfelt statement that the tennis star has put out. I read the statement and I just thought it was so very genuine, and many people will have just empathized with her difficulties. You know, it is incredibly intimidating to face the world's press after competitions like these, and it seems to be that the tennis authorities in this case have really misread the zeitgeist and the way that people are now really trying to have much more understanding and empathy for mental health issues. Like this tennis player has very openly admits she suffers from serious anxiety and depression. And I think there'll be quite a backlash over the way the organisers of the competition have handled it.
It's going to be interesting to see how other tournaments deal with it and what sort of support she gets from other players, isn't it? OK, FT now, finally. What do you make of this, Anna, the Chinese changing their child policy?
I mean, this was a particularly cruel and unpleasant policy that China's had for a number of years. And it started off where you couldn't have more than one child. And there was some terrible stories coming out of China of the consequences of that, forced abortions and just heartbreak for people who were, forced by law to not to have more than one child. And then they changed that to 2, and now it's to 3. And they've done it not through any sort of great act of humanity, which would have been the right way, but for harsh economics, because they now have an aging population. And because they're finding themselves increasingly that families actually almost, some of them by choice, are not having more than 1 or 2 children. So they almost now are positively encouraging people. Now, that's happened in other countries where there's been a problem with an aging population and younger people not having the number of children that they had in the past, effectively to support that older population. Very different in China. It's all been done for economic reasons, and it just, I think, shows what at its heart is a brutal and inhumane regime.
But it also highlights the fact, doesn't it, that even when they scrapped the one-child policy, Isabel, it's so expensive to have children that people just weren't. Briefly, we're running out of time now.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, really, that China is still mandating how many children people can have. But as Anna says, this tells you all you need to know about the nature of that regime, which is deeply sinister in so many ways. So, yeah, great that they've relaxed their policy. But why are they bossing about their population and interfering in how many children they have in the first place?
OK. Anna, Isabel, it's been great. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
Pleasure.